projects come in, and are looking very much forward to hearing your questions. Again, I'm Tom Fleetwood. I'm the director of the agency, and leading our discussion today will be Devashish Chakravarti, who is our senior real estate finance associate director. We're also joined here in the room by a number of my colleagues with the Department of Housing. I might just ask you to introduce yourself, if you will.
Sure. Anna Shapiro, Deputy Director of Redevelopment.
I'm Barnett, Deputy Director over the Office to Prevent Net Homelessness.
I'm Bree Fuller. I work on preservation.
Julie Chen, Senior Real Estate Finance Manager.
Alex Yee, Senior Finance Manager.
Mark Bonavista, Division Director for Design, Development, and Construction.
Megan Van Dam, Director for Affordable Housing Development.
So thank you all for being here, and welcome. And again, the show is yours.
Thank you, Tom. Appreciate it. Good afternoon, everyone. The NOFA, or Notice of Funding Availability, is used to support the housing goals of Fairfax County. The primary goal is to produce 10,000 new units of affordable housing by 2034, as stipulated by the Board of Supervisors. And there should be no net loss of the county's existing stock of affordable housing. Now, some strategies to get to that goal include investment of public land, more specifically, the ground lease to developers to build affordable housing, and to incentivize affordable housing through development policy by streamlining zoning and entitlement procedures. We also, in order to get to that goal, we also would like to invest local funds such as Housing Blueprint Fund, Tyson's Housing Trust Fund money, state and federal sources, which include CDBG, Home ARP, and ARPA funding. We would another part goal is to house vulnerable populations. This includes people who are physically disabled, intellectually disabled, and the elderly, as well as the investment in supportive infrastructure to create communities of opportunity. Now, the FCRHA has moving to work authority, and they can use this authority to use housing choice voucher funds for capital needs or investment in affordable housing projects. For this fiscal year's NOFA, there's over $31.9 million available, and the breakdown is between local and federal funds. The local funds include the Housing Blueprint Loan and Tyson's Housing Trust Fund. The Housing Blueprint has $26.7 million available this year, and Tyson's Housing Trust Fund has $349,000 available. For federal sources, you have the Community Development Block Grant, which is $821,000 available this year. The Home Investment Partnership Program, which has approximately $1.2 million available, and the Home ARP, which has approximately $2.6 million available. And the Home ARP program is specifically targeted towards PSH, or Permanent Supportive Housing Program, Permanent Supportive Housing Units for formerly homeless individuals. Now, in terms of eligible activities through this NOFA, this includes rental projects of 5 or more units, home ownership projects of 2 or more units, and projects using local and ARPA dollars must be in Fairfax County, including the towns of Herndon, Vienna, and Clifton, and projects using CDBG Home and Home ARP funds must be in Fairfax County, including the towns of Herndon, Vienna, and Clifton, or in the cities of Falls Church or Fairfax. Projects may apply through the HCD Ignite website. You can reach out to county staff here, and we can provide you with a link. We encourage you to apply early because funds are limited this year, and we expect a lot of applications. FCRHA funding guidelines, or the loan adjustment and financing policy, can also be found on the NOFA website along with the application and the NOFA document itself. Now, the applications will be accepted on a rolling basis through June 30th, 2024, or until the end of this fiscal year, or until all funding is committed for this fiscal year. For projects applied for 9% low-income housing tax credits, or LIHTC, in March 2024, applications for local or federal funding from the NOFA must be received by 4 p.m. on October 16th, 2023 at the latest, in order to ensure timely awards of these funds. Now, in terms of appropriate uses for these funds, there are income levels for projects requesting local funds such as Blueprint, Tyson's Housing Trust Fund, and federal dollars such as CDBG, Home, and Home ARP, and it should be at 60% AMI or below. Now, LIHTC income averaging will be considered, But the max AMI or area median income allowed through the income averaging is 80% AMI. Projects must comply with the Virginia Housing Total Development Cost or TDC per unit or cost per square foot guidelines if using LIHTC. And you need to meet one or the other in order to be eligible for low-income housing tax credits, whether they be 4% or 9% credits. And we have a strong preference for utilization of FCRHA bonds and 4% LIHTC deals. Now, Virginia Housing is our arch enemy, so we don't want you using their bonds. Just kidding. Now, in terms of funding request considerations, HCD staff will evaluate funding requested per unit based on the population served. This includes more lower AMI skewed units for lower income individuals, which would also mean less revenue for the project, or PSH for permanent supportive housing units for formerly homeless individuals. Of course, this would mean higher operating expenses for the project and the reasonableness of the projections. Applicant experience and qualifications are also considered in terms of the number of LIHTC projects developed or deals preserved and the readiness to proceed. This includes zoning approval, financing commitments, entitlements, and site control, which I'll get into more detail later, as well as reasonable financial projections will be taken into consideration. Now, we're also looking at factors involving equity or fairness in terms of affordable housing in high opportunity neighborhoods. Now, these high opportunity neighborhoods include neighborhoods that have low poverty, significant amenities, they're major job centers, and they have ample public transportation options. And provision of services, including daycare centers, health clinics, job training programs, just to name a few. Now, applicants should maximize the efficiency of their local, federal, and state funds awarded through this NOFA on a per unit basis. And funds awarded through the NOFA should leverage other sources of funding. We would prefer a leveraging ratio of 4-to-1 or greater of non-county resources for applications in this funding round, which means for every $1 of county funding, there should be $4 or more of other funding sources. In terms of some highlights or changes for FY 2024, we've consolidated funding sources to utilize in conjunction with new construction and or preservation of affordable housing. As you've seen already, our previous NOFA cycles would typically use just or have only local sources such as the Housing Blueprint or Tyson's Housing Trust Fund. With this one, as you've seen, we're combining those local sources along with federal sources such as CDBG, Home, and HOMAR. We also have a higher threshold criteria for this fiscal year. Certain criteria, instead of being scored, are now part of the minimum threshold criteria for the project that the project must meet in order to be eligible. And I'll explain more of this in the next slide. We've also expanded the county's policy priorities through this year's NOFA. One, we'd like to increase the supply of affordable housing. 2, we want to increase the long-term affordability of these particular projects. 3, we want to support existing housing in which residents are at risk of displacement. And 4, we want to remove barriers for households experiencing homelessness, people with very low incomes, people with disabilities, or low-income seniors. And that's reflected in the scoring. As you can see, as you might have noticed in the NOFA and the scoring sheet, we're providing more points for deeper affordability, longer affordability term, and resource efficiency to reach the goals that we're looking for with the expanded county policy priorities. But in addition to that, we are also scoring and encouraging access to opportunity and transit. And we're still scoring on other criteria that we've scored in previous years' NOFA cycles, including transit-oriented location, or more family-sized units, or more units with 3 or more bedrooms, and also projects that have permanent supportive housing. We also look for projects that are aiding special populations, including people with disabilities, low-income seniors, and as well as projects that incorporate universal design elements from Virginia Housing and Section 504 accessibility standards. We also prefer a tenant selection from the county's own waiting lists to be eligible for these units that are going to be developed, And we also prefer that any developer use FCRHA bonds and have existing project-based subsidy if possible. And as I mentioned before, we've increased the threshold criteria. And the following minimum threshold criteria should be met before the project will be considered for funding. This includes that the project must meet the income levels and terms for either new construction or preservation. As I mentioned before, it should be at 60% AMI or below, or 80% AMI or below for projects utilizing income averaging. The developer should have demonstrated experience and organizational capacity for the proposed project as outlined in the NOFA. And as we've discussed before, needs to be a demonstration of a readiness to proceed. There needs to be secured financing and or a clear timeline for acquiring those additional sources, such as showing commitment letters or LOIs, letters of interest from other funders. We look for zoning approval from the Department of Planning and Development. Now, this is mandatory. However, we are flexible for projects that use public land on a case-by-case basis. There should also be evidence of site control. We want to see that the site is already owned for deed or a ground lease for a minimum term of 75 years, or a purchase contract with a minimum 12 months 12-month term beyond the date of the application itself. We also want to see that the project demonstrates financial feasibility, and we use various underwriting criteria to determine this, including a loan-to-value ratio, the appraised value, which shows that our loan, along with the other loans, are fully collateralized by the value of the property. The construction costs are reasonable and within market standards. It meets the VHDA cost limits, and the rehab addresses needs outlined in a physical needs assessment if it is a rehab project. And we're also looking for a DCR, debt service coverage ratio of 1.15 or higher. We allow lower ratios on certain occasions. We also want to see that the project has an equity contribution from the developer itself. This can be either in form of cash from the developer or deferred developer fee. And of course, there should be compliance with federal, state, and local project requirements, and this may differ by funding source. Please note that any person or firm suspended or debarred from participating in county, state, or federal procurement is not eligible to receive funding. Now, new this year, in order to help us analyze the financial feasibility of the project, we ask that you fill out the proposed terms worksheet, which is attached to the NOFA. That's been uploaded to the FCRHA website. In addition to the underwriting criteria and some of the goals through this year's NOFA, the projects that receive financing will be required to execute loan documents and related restriction agreements. And the terms that will be included in these loan documents and restriction agreements include a loan term that is the greater of 30 years or the term of the fixed rate amortizing first mortgage. The FCRHA must have both an option and a right of first refusal, and all projects will be subject to a land use restriction agreement that will govern the affordability term and limit rent increases by AMI. Now, the FCRHA, at its own discretion, may require affordability covenants to be reported senior to all financing, and other requirements as deemed necessary may be required to protect the interests of the FCRHA and Fairfax County. Now, new this year, projects utilizing CDBG funds awarded through the NOFA will be subject to Build America, Buy America, or BABA requirements for iron and steel products. Applicants should account for any cost or other impacts and note these in their application or their applications. And with that, we'll take any questions you may have. Thank you. We can hear you online just in case you want to speak virtually. Yeah.
Thank you for that. That was really helpful. The zoning approval, was that listed as a scoring criteria or a minimum threshold?
Minimum threshold required criteria. Now, as I mentioned before, we may allow certain exceptions if the project is using public land on occasion, on a case-by-case basis, more specifically. Yeah.
Are there parameters or guidelines for the the types of terms we should be proposing for the one?
Yeah, sure. So I can go back to that sheet, right? The proposed term worksheet. So as you can see in this middle column right here, these are the middle column, the Fairfax County target. Those are the terms we prefer, right? Minimum in terms of like per unit, $85,000 or less, right? A term that's coterminous with a senior loan. The rate on a blueprint loan or any county funding should be 2% simple interest per annum. DCR 1.15, LTV 100% or less. Those are our goals. We like to see that your projects get as close to them as possible, but we are flexible in terms of if it goes a little higher, that's okay. If the project scores well in other areas, like, population served, very low income, or if it has project-based vouchers, or if it's in a high opportunity area. We'll look at everything holistically.
So in terms of zoning, after that question, that's kind of a big one. We're developing at risk until we really do have projects. So when you talk about zoning, final zoning approval, does that mean we've come in with full architectural documents, we've got our civil engaged, we've calculated stormwater, we've got all those pieces in place, and now we're submitting for approval, yet we don't have a project? Yeah. No.
So are you asking if we're looking for a specific zoning approval letter from DPP,
Yes.
right? In most cases, yes, that would be the case.
Okay.
Now I'm not completely familiar with the zoning process. We've got certain staff members who might be able to speak to that. But yeah, when you apply for the project, apply for funding from us, we want to see that you've received a zoning approval from the Department of Planning and Development. And as I said before, we may allow certain exceptions when it's public land. Yeah, I believe the plans and the drawings, all that should be ready so that, you've got the zoning in hand. I don't know, Megan or Anna, if you'd like to respond.
Yeah, I mean,
Anything more?
probably we just want to make sure it's almost there if it's not there yet. So I think that those exceptions will be like where you're it's a pretty long process and you finish the majority of it. And of course, with the October deadline, and if you're going in for the tax credits in March, you will have to have it by the time you get there, right? So if you're applying for our funds and there's a path to get to that zoning approval by March, we can talk about that.
Okay, that sounds reasonable.
A way to see who's online.
I have one more question. Is there a list of properties owned by Fairfax County Redevelopment Housing Authority?
You've got a list of that nature, right?
List of properties available?
Not available. I don't know, Tom, if you want to speak.
Yeah, just generally speaking, with respect to publicly owned properties, we will issue a solicited RFP for redevelopment, and that proceeds along a separate development track.
Yeah, okay.
So do stay tuned for future opportunities because there are a number of them coming down the pike.
Yes.
But we do not have any that are immediately available.
Okay. And because some housing authorities do publish when they know their P&A, when buildings of certain developments are seeking, its useful life.
We will do that as we continue to move through our properties as well as, properties that we're getting from the county and then start to list those. It's separate from this process, and even properties that have been awarded through a PPEA do go through our NOFA as well. So this is part of it's just our financial process, not
Right.
our
Thank you.
After reviewing all the applications, do you work with the applicant on suggestions to bring the terms back into, or I guess the project back into preferred terms, or maybe lowering the request to work with work towards, a successful application? Or is it, the initial proposals, the initial applications we received, if it doesn't meet our needs or these ones do, then that's the one shot you got at that?
Yeah, so I would say it's a back and forth process, like after we receive your application, we'll review it, we'll compare it to the underwriting criteria, as I've mentioned before. And if we're noticing that it's not meeting certain criteria, like, the target of $85,000 or less per unit, or, a DCR of 1.15, we'll come back to you and say, hey, we're noticing that your request isn't really meeting some of those criteria. Can you work with those numbers and see if you can get closer to our targets? And if you can show that flexibility, we'd be willing to work with you and see if we can get it closer to those targets.
And you'll be doing this for each applicant.
Yeah, for the most part, yeah.
God bless you.
But
Our funds are limited, so
Yeah,
I would say,
exactly.
just within the context of, we don't have unlimited funds.
Yeah,
we're
exactly.
Selecting projects that, that we can fund.
in addition to those underwriting criteria, we want to make sure that your project is meeting the goals as outlined by the NOFA.
Maybe you can see people online. Can they speak or? Is it a hand?
Yeah, no, if they have a speaker, they should be able to speak and we can hear them. Yeah, just need to unmute yourself.
I should probably see everybody.
Okay.
She's not seeing hands though.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. If you'd like to speak in racial things, share here.
Or the folks who came in a bit later from the start, do you want us to go back to anything?
Any other questions about preservation? Yeah, no.
Opportunities, and we're, as Tom likes to say, we're open for business, so we want to see kind of what creativity can be brought in. And that's where, available funds.
Okay. Go once, go twice. All right. Thank you, everyone. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Everybody signs, I sign. Down this little